was he secretly on the Taliban side, killing 20 of them so he can assassinate one National Guard troop in DC? I don't think so. It doesn't make sense, right?
That is also a political conflict. That is also, you know what I mean? That is also a murder.
Okay, so can we agree here that these are just really, really messy lines
Yeah,
sometimes?
there are.
So okay.
Listen, the Jews don't control the world. If anyone's ever been to Israel, they don't even control Israel, right? Like,
I mean,
it's crazy.
Deep pockets, bro. Deep pockets.
It's not as deep as you think. If you do the research,
Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
Welcome back to Christ and Caliphate. Today, we are going to be having a very serious conversation about the radicalization of Ramanullah Lakanwal and just a discussion in general about how people in the Muslim world and everywhere can become radicalized and what people can actually do about it. And then we're going to have a slightly more humorous second half where we talk about a recent story in Afghanistan connecting to Peaky Blinders. So let's recap the Ramanullah Lakanwal thing real quick here. We covered this before, but just, you guys want to recap who he is, what happened?
Yeah, Ramanullah Lakanwal is an Afghani and worked with CIA and Afghan special forces with the United States in Afghanistan. He moved here back in 2021 or 22. I'm not pretty sure the exact dates. He was also a green card holder, as far as my information is concerned. And out of nowhere, unexpectedly, he went out and drove all the way from Washington State, Bellingham, that's where he used to live, to Washington, D.C., and in a cold blood killed two innocent military personnel.
Just one. The other guy's getting better.
Oh, okay. That's great. That's very good to know. But like shot one and injured one.
Right.
Right. So that's a little bit background, but I think today we're going to be talking about the root causes, what drove him, what was his, what's going on in his mind, and so on and so forth. Right.
So just to kind of like get this out of the way early on, people talk about vetting people into this country and how we do that. And I think all of us are pro good vetting, but I don't think good vetting solves this scenario, because if your military is operating in another country, you actually need to be able to be the kind of country, for the sake of military operations, that can say, yeah, if you help us and there's ever blowback, we'll give you residency in our country. Like, just for pragmatic operational reasons, you need to be able to do that. So somebody who's been working with America for years is the kind of person who we would want to be able to come to our country. This man had proved his loyalty. So unless he was an extremist when he came into the country.
I mean, why would you be working with the United States, who is inherently your enemy? Then I don't think, as he was extremist to begin with.
I agree. Now, somebody who thinks this is just like a long con, to kill one person and wound another is not worth the math here, right?
Yeah.
So in the course of his job, I'm sure he killed Taliban fighters.
Oh yeah.
So, was he secretly on the Taliban side, killing 20 of them so he can assassinate one National Guard troop in DC? I don't think so. It doesn't make sense, right?
Mhm.
If there's something bigger at play, then sure. Like if he like detonate a bomb in a government building, then that's one thing.
Yeah.
But this was not a well coordinated attack.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, go ahead because I got to make my case here.
I mean, I don't know how much vetting helps in this case because, like you said, he was vetted. I do think that we need to take like a, I mean, outside of what radicalized him, that's the point. And I'm gonna stay on point here. I don't think that. I think that there needs to be like, all right, we let you in, you know, and we let you stay here, and you know, we vetted you and everything, and then you broke the law, and I think that the punishment needs to be like double or something. I know that that's not like necessarily fair or fit any legal code of anything or anything like that, but there needs to be more of a deterrent, you know. I guess in that guy's mind, he had already made up his mind about what he was going to do. There was somewhere I read, you know, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I saw it in more than one place that his brother might have been an ISIS recruiter. So when he came to the States, you know, he was on board with the US, obviously, enough to come here, right? And then somewhere along the line, he got radicalized. I mean, I could throw an alternate theory out there that he was like so upset with how we handled what happened in Afghanistan and us throwing his country to the wolves, and essentially arming the people that he had fought for a very long time, that he snapped. You know, like you work and you work. And I know a lot of veterans who were extremely upset about it. Obviously, they didn't take up arms, but I know a lot of people in former military, and none of them thought that, you know, this was the best way that we could have handled this pullout. You know, it was the best way. And we left Afghanistan in the best position to succeed. And all of my friends who died over there, you know, they can rest easy, right? So, you know, in a way, in a long run, like whatever happened and whatever radicalized him, there's a very distinct possibility that we fueled it, right, by our, you know, kind of really chaotic, and I'll say like cowardly, you know, pullout of what we did. I'm not like a foreign policy expert. I'm not a military, you know, I'm not like a military strategist, but you know, it doesn't take a genius to see that that was handled poorly and how people could respond to that. Like it definitely emboldened the Taliban, right? Like it definitely emboldened, you know, jihadists everywhere. Like we you know, we beat Rome, right? Like we drove back the Greeks, however you want to look at it.
There was a book cover that says "Withdrawing from Afghanistan for Dummies," which goes civilians first, equipment next, troops last, destroy base.
Yeah, right? Like, you know, it's so crazy that they were like, the way that they processed it was, we'll just leave it all, right? We'll leave like $1 billion in Humvees and small arms and weapons, and oh, you know, we took the hard drives out of the helicopters. Big deal. Like, you took the hard drives out, great. You know, they still have the helicopters. Once they figure out how to fly them, you know, they're going to be menacing like their neighbors, Pakistan, right? Like,
I mean,
those kinds of things. So
their weapons, the American weapon, is used by the Taliban who are fighting Pakistan army, and Pakistan is complaining about it. That's a separate case. But coming back to the original issue here, and I think that's how I'm going to make my case. People associate it with religion or Islam straight away. I do not. And here is why I do not, right? I see him as it's a personal act of terror. I call the murderer of Charlie Kirk as a terrorist. I call all the people who go out and shoot in mass shooting in schools, they are terrorists by the same category. If you are putting Lakhanwal separately and saying, no, he was only terrorist and those people are not, they have mental issues and they're suffering from mental issues, then I think Lakhanwal deserves to be treated as someone that has mental issues. Here's my case, how he has a mental issue. See, I think there should be two different ways to wed in people. One who come with no military background, people who are normal people fleeing war and so on and so forth. There has to be a separate way of vetting them, going through all the procedures. But who were in active war zone, we know in United States, it's a big thing. Like a lot of people who were in Iraq war or who were in Afghanistan war suffer PTSD. Right? There is some trauma related to it. And trauma can have effects on your mental health. And I think I would tie two things with Luckenwald. One, mental health, and seeing that the allies that he worked for abandoned his country at the end of the day. So these two things combined gave him a justification to go and kill. I don't see any direct relation to Islam in particular.
I would say motivation, not justification. Like a justification means that you have a legitimate reason to do something.
I mean, in his mind, the justification.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it motivated him. That would, yeah. Just for clarity's sake. But
so let's put some different categories here, right? So if you don't want to define this as terrorism, what would you say is an example of Islamic terrorism?
Islamic terrorism is when someone is driven by Islamic ideology, number one. Their motive is to give Islam a rise and killing infidels, by killing infidels and causing a large scale casualties, number one. And number two, it has to be planned and orchestrated by a group of people who are so much religiously motivated. It can be an individual act. I'm not saying it cannot be an individual act, but there has to be a background of it, right? That person's association. For example, if someone is fighting against Taliban, kill a bunch of Talibans, then he is on the other side. He knows that, Islamically, I mean, whether we like it or not, in Islamic world, if you're on American side, you are not with Islam, right? It's very simple. It's not so complicated, right? It is a little bit different in here, like how Muslims believe that, we are part of America and so on and so forth. And they're right about it. There's nothing wrong in it. But how the perspective of the world outside of America is that America is the greater evil, and it's because of their association with certain things and so on and so forth. We can go down that road, and it's a long, long journey. But coming back to the point where if someone is religiously motivated, number one, and if their action is driven by this ideology that, I am doing it in the name of Islam, then I think that will be terrorism.
Okay, so let's say the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida a few years ago. Let's take these guys that drove this truck into these Christmas markets in Europe, like those kind of things. You can legitimately say terrorism, or even that guy that beheaded that teacher in France, and all these people say declare loyalty to ISIS or something, right? Whereas this you think should be categorized as one guy losing his mind and acting it out in a ways that and whether he says Allahu Akbar when he shoots someone or not is kind of immaterial here, right?
Yeah. Allahu Akbar, saying God is the greatest, doesn't make someone a terrorist.
That or not.
There's reports of it. Let's say
I'm sure it certainly looks like it, though.
Yeah, I mean, stereotyping, right? That's a stereotype. I mean, we have the most corrupt general, Asim Munir, right? He's in the Pakistani army and he's leading Pakistan, and his slogan is also Allahu Akbar.
Right.
I think it has nothing to do with particularly, but it's just a not religious, but just a slogan in the war,
Yeah.
This is the FBI.gov. This is their definition of international terrorism. Violent criminal acts inspired by individuals and or groups who are inspired by, associated with, designated foreign terrorist organizations or nations state-sponsored. The definition of domestic terrorism is violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature.
I don't see him fitting in both of them.
Well, I think that it depends on what his motive is, right? So if his, first of all, he did not attack civilians, right? He attacked military, personnel. They were National Guardsmen, right? They were in uniform, and he attacked them. What happened earlier when somebody walked into, do you remember those two Jewish people who got shot outside of the museum in Washington, D.C.? That person, committed a murder, right? But it was, his first words were "Free Palestine," right? So that, definitely fits along like the mindscape of the in that definition of domestic terrorism. So what I learned, I took a couple of counterterrorism classes in college. The problem with calling him, there's a problem with calling him a terrorist, and there's a problem with not calling him a terrorist. Okay. But in the end, it all just boils down to what his motivations were, right? So if he's saying like, okay, I talked with somebody in ISIS, my brother works for ISIS. I'm not saying that this is true, but let's just say it is true.
I mean, I think, when these type of things happen, then there pops up many theories, which I don't think that I can trust.
It's fine. You can trust the theory or not trust the theory, but in the end of the day, you have to find a motive for why he killed people. Right. So we're exploring different motives in the conversation. Right. So if he just snaps and he's a veteran and he goes crazy and he drives across the country and he shoots a couple of National Guardsmen or whatever, regardless of his background, right, that's a homicide, right, and an attempted murder, and you would take that through the legal system in a certain way, right? You would pursue it as a certain kind of crime. Okay, but from the FBI's perspective, and that they're definitely on it.
Oh yeah.
You have to explore whether or not it fits in that definition of terrorism. That's their definition of terrorism. The problem I have with radicalization is that it takes advantage of weak people, right? It finds weak-minded people, it finds people who are suffering, and it uses a lever against them and turns them. But that doesn't absolve them from being, punished as terrorists. Right. And I'm not saying he should be, but I'm saying that if there's an association, if there's a known association with like someone, right, in the Afghan community who radicalizes him, okay, then he is a terrorist.
So let's
he associates with terrorists, and in those conversations, right, becomes motivated by terrorists, and then he does a terrorist act, even though he's not a part of ISIS or he's not a part of, whatever, Islamic Jihad or whatever.
So there's a spectrum here, right? And it's a spectrum that's overlapping in the Venn diagram. So I think we can agree that, so on the high end of the spectrum, let's take 9/11. These guys who've prepared for years, meticulously planned something, right? That is clearly terrorism. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have just some veteran somewhere. Let's take the DC sniper, for example, from the 2000.
Yeah, I remember
from like 2002. He was a U.S. military veteran. Actually, that's actually not a great example because let's take let's just take a veteran who loses his mind and goes and shoots a couple people, which happens sometimes. Those are two different ends of the spectrum. Like, we can agree that those are fundamentally different phenomenon, even if people from the first category benefit and may feed into people from the second category. So I think this guy snapped, and it's entirely plausible that there are external actors who are taking advantage of that snapping too. It's not definite, but it's plausible.
Wait. Let's back up to the DC sniper. Okay. Because if I was a prosecutor, I would definitely feed that line. I would say, okay, regardless of whatever his motivations were, he caused terror among civilians, right? And maybe we won't ever know what his motivations are, but the effect of what he did, he effectively caused fear, right? And you know, as a prosecutor, I would try because you're trying to get the most, like you're trying to get the stiffest punishment, right? Like until the person wants to make a deal, you have to come up with something to charge the person with. And I remember that, and I remember us being afraid to go outside. And I drove a white van around for work, like that was my job, and every time you'd see a white van and you'd get these news things and you'd be like, he's driving a white van. And the keep an eye on the tail lights, because he would pull the tail light out and he would shoot from the back of the tail light, right? Like he had holes in the van where he would stick the rifle out of the back of the van. So you're effectively like, and we were 3 hours from DC, 4 hours from DC. And it wasn't just in DC. I mean, there were sites he was spotted like moving up and down, that area, right? From Maryland to New Jersey to Boston. So, effectively the entire area was, terrorized, right? And I mean, sure, it's not political. You know what I mean? But was it? Like, do you not know that, Ted Kaczynski, right? The Unabomber, was a Princeton graduate who hated his government and then started making bombs and mailing them to people. And you would open it up, and then next thing you know, you're Alfred in the Batman movie, right?
So I would say that, like a school shooting, for example, is terrorism as well.
No, it's not. It's terrorism if the person says, I'm pissed off at Trump and I'm pissed off at this administration, and then I go and shoot them, right? But if the person is hearing hallucinations from God telling them, like, like they're in some religious fervor, they're schizophrenic, and they walk into a school, like this is what happened with John Lennon, right? The reason why John Lennon was shot wasn't because of his politics. It was because the guy believed that there were little people living in the walls that were telling him to shoot John Lennon. Right? So he cut holes in the walls and he would talk to these little people that weren't there. That's insanity, right? So
yeah, but there's a spectrum there, because the guys who do 9/11 believe they're going to get 72 virgins the moment their body evaporates, right?
Sure.
So these are...
But that had nothing. Why didn't they attack France, right? Like, why didn't they attack Italy? Why didn't they attack South Africa? They attacked the United States because it was politically active. It was politically and militarily active in that corner of the world. So, whatever they believed and whatever they thought their outcome was, if our friend, not our friend, but this gentleman that we're speaking of, he's not our friend.
No,
we don't know him.
We don't do that.
No, we don't know him.
We don't know him. But if this man believed that he was going to get 72 virgins at the end of the conversation, right? Like, all right, they're going to execute me, and I'm going to get my reward in paradise, right? The hard part and the messy part is that right now is tied to jihadi groups.
Well,
like how do you divorce it from that? You can't, right? So when you sit there and you have Arafat, like convincing people to do acts of terror, right? In the intifadas, okay? And then telling them that their reward is this. It's a religious conflict that bleeds over, that is also a political conflict, that is also, you know what I mean? That is also a murder.
Okay, so can we agree here that these are just really, really messy lines sometimes?
Yeah, there are.
So, okay, so let's go back to this guy, right?
Let me make one last point because I haven't had a chance to speak.
My bad.
No problem, Cybars.
Yeah.
What I would say is, we need to be very specific about placing categories on people. It should not be based on their religion. I have seen this, and I'm making it public statement, that it is very easy to entitle a person with a Muslim background to terrorism if they do such sort of action, and it's not the case otherwise, right? So if you call randomly, if you say everybody who do terrorize people is terrorist, then I think that principle or that definition should be applied to everybody who does so, which we were talking about that sniper shooter, which we're talking about the school shooting, which we're talking about anybody. Regardless of their origin, regardless of their background, there should be a uniform application of this. Yeah, you are terrorist because you are killing innocent civilians. That's the point blank argument.
So let's just zero in here, right? Let's and make sure we're defining our terms clearly here. So there's a scenario here. So let's take somebody who was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, here in the West, starts hearing voices in their head, and thinks angels are communicating with them, and then goes and shoots people because he thinks that's what the angels talking to him want. That person, I wouldn't necessarily think, okay, this person's a terrorist. This person is somebody who is a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, so I would say it's possible that this guy is just having a sort of Muslim version of that, right? Paranoid schizophrenia is probably going to take the packaging of the culture you're raised in. So if you're raised Muslim, having a paranoid schizophrenic outburst is going to come in Islamic packaging. That, I don't think, is inherently being a terrorist. However, this guy could also be paranoid schizophrenic, and there could be some, handler in Afghanistan sometime being like, yes, brother, you are a true Ghazi in the cause of Allah, and what we want you to do is to go to, DC and, cause havoc. At that point, it would still be paranoid schizophrenia, but I think that legitimately crosses the line into terrorism at that point. Do you think that's fair? Is that fair?
I think, you used the example. Let me just flip the side and say, what if that schizophrenic person blows up a building in New York with the same ideology and kill 200 or 2,000, because the mass casualties makes a big impact, right? Killing 2 persons versus killing 2,000 people. So at the end of the day, I think for me, in my mind, killing any innocent civilian, innocent person without or innocent is innocent. There should not be without a probable cause. You cannot take law in your hand. So killing innocent people is act of terrorism, whether it's done by an Afghani, whether it's drive through Muslim background, Christian background, Jewish background, whatever background it is.
In that,
uniform.
In that context.
So but basically,
I don't agree with that though.
But
because if I like have a crime of passion or something, are you saying that's like also an act of terrorism?
Do you agree with my definition though of you could have a Muslim paranoid schizophrenic that yells Allahu Akbar who wouldn't be properly categorized as a terrorist, but if you have external people feeding into that, it is?
I think that in that context, what the law would do is look at the effect of what they did versus what their motives were. So if you couldn't clearly ascertain their motives, but then it like fit the template of of prior crimes, then legally you would try to tie it to that template of prior crimes, right? So you're saying, okay, it doesn't matter if he's like maybe you're not saying it, but the idea is out there, that if somebody is a paranoid schizophrenic and he's a Muslim, and he goes and blows up a building with people in it, or does this or does that, that's not necessarily terrorism, but it doesn't matter because it causes terrorism. You see what I'm saying? If I go and I burn down a building, right, because I'm a pyromaniac and I'm crazy, right, and I set a building on fire, and then and I cause a series of fires, but some of the buildings that I set fire to are government buildings, right? It doesn't matter if I'm a pyromaniac. It matters what I do matters, right?
Okay, so but then surely school shooters would fit that definition too, because they caused people terror sending their kids to school.
It depends on why they did it though, because if you sit there and you say, okay, like I shoot up a school is not it doesn't necessarily fit under the thing of like a government
Okay,
building.
okay, so
Right. And teachers are not necessarily government employees, and kids are definitely not government employees.
so if a white atheist nihilist does this, the motives matter. But if an Afghan guy does it, the motives don't matter. Only the effects matter.
I'm saying if you can't ascertain the motive, of course the motive matters, right? But a lot of times with these white atheists, you know, or whatever, right? Or the Christchurch shooter in New Zealand.
Uh-huh.
I mean, guy had a manifesto, you know, or somebody will be like, you'll go through their social media posts and they'll be like, you know, you know, and this has unfortunately been the case with some of these people. Like there's mental health issues sitting on top of a political powder keg, right? Like I, as a trans person, don't feel safe anymore in America. And, you know, on top of that, that person's taking antidepressants, their hormones are all messed with or whatever. So then they go out and, in order to, you know, strike back against something, right, that this administration has done, they'll do a crime. Or there's some, you know, longer, lengthier thing. I mean, you can't just sit there and say like, all right, he did this Afghan guy did this, and these school shooters do this, right? Like in criminology, you don't look at it that way. In criminology, you look at it and you say, you know, this is the profile of what this person does. And do they fit the profile or not? Whether or not all of the pieces are there.
I mean,
Because that's how you would approach it from like,
yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right that there is always a scenario, there is effects, and there is background. So all these three things should be combined. But my objection from the beginning of this episode is whenever there is such acts are done, whether you call it terrorism or personal acts or whatever, is done by someone who has a Muslim background, we are so eagerly waiting to blame that on Islam and jump it on and say terrorism, Muslim terrorism.
that's a problem.
That's where I am against.
I would agree with you. And what I would also say is whenever there's a school shooting, right, or some act of like, you know, mass domestic violence, let's just call it that, right? Like, they'll say the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, it was a Trump supporter," you know what I mean, or it was a crazy liberal or something like that. And you know, the problem is the facts don't come out, right? Like that's why you do investigations.
Mhm.
That's why you have like a process of due process. That's why you have the FBI. That's why you have all of these things.
Yeah.
But I think that my bigger problem with radicalization is if you were to look at remember Zarqawi? After 9/11, he was like led in the destabilizing of Iraq. And he was one of the main Al-Qaeda people on the ground. And when I was in college, we did a deep dive on this guy, right? And Zarqawi was a failure. Like he was an alcoholic. He did drugs. You know, he wound up in prison multiple times. He was extremely violent. He was like a purposeless like drifter. But in prison, it was the Muslims, you know, the radical Muslims who got a hold of him and, you know, kind of gave him religion and then led him to this process of directing, you know, an already like not stable person, right? And giving him a place, right? Because he's an attack dog. And they saw that this man could serve their purposes and they intentionally radicalized him. They took a criminal, right? A person who, you know, you get sent to jail. Your point of jail is punishment and hopefully reformation, right? Like hopefully like some moment of, I mean, excuse the language because now we're talking about a Muslim, but come to Jesus moment, right? Like I was in jail. I had one, you know, like, all right, I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I've got to stop doing what I'm doing or I'm going to wind up in a bad place. Right. And this is how he was radicalized. And this is how Al-Qaeda like did a lot of their radicalizations. They would find people in these situations and they had a profile of a person that they would flip. Right. They had a profile of a person. It used to be like the Soviets would come in and find somebody who had a taste for women. right, to get them to flip on their country. So they would give them women, and then they'd blackmail them or something like that. But the difference in what how the radical terrorist organizations work, right, is they find somebody who is in the state of like danger, right, to themselves, or danger to others or whatever. And they come in with like this is a righteous way to live. This is how you can move forward. This is how you can change your ways. And this is how you can serve the greater good. You weren't wrong in what you were doing as an angry, aggressive person, right? It's just focused in the wrong way.
So let's talk about this scenario, right? So to kind of move on from.
Well, I think that's what happened here.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
I would say that's a plausible thing that could have happened here.
Yeah, it's plausible.
Right.
I don't have.
It's not proven, but that's plausible, right?
Right.
It's plausible.
Yeah. Well, if we're gonna say
With lots of ifs and buts.
With lots of ifs and buts,
Okay,
right? It's plausible, right? So the plausible outcome here is one guy just snapped by himself. That's plausible too, right?
Absolutely.
Right. You don't need any.
Absolutely.
You don't need any of this stuff, right? So we have two plausible situations that are different but interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say this points to is that our policy in Afghanistan and our refugee resettlement process has created the perfect storm for these kinds of things to happen, and we are not doing enough about it. Now, so if Al Qaeda like people have a profile, which they do, we have now ensured circumstances where there are now hundreds, maybe thousands more people like that, people who have a history of violence, don't say that negatively.
Yeah, and then they also they also make disciples.
Right, who are bored, who are not assimilating well, who are not feeling welcome, who are depressed, who are dealing with gray skies and rain for 6 months out of the year. Right?
Bro, that's depressing in and of itself.
Yeah, right. It's like, at least if you're resettling like freaking California, you can like go outside and be
can I just say something though? At least we have the decency to kill ourselves first here. This is Seattle being the suicide capital of America.
Yeah, it's also the serial killer capital of America too.
It is too. My wife grew up right along the Green River with the Green River Killer. And he would just kidnap teenage girls, and she was a teenage girl.
For context, for people who've never been to Seattle, from like May to September, it's like heaven on earth. But after that,
man, it's the opposite of.
Anyways, I would like to make one last point before we wrap this up. I would like to go on this road of explaining how a Muslim becomes radicalized. What is the typical normal way the Taliban's recruit youngsters, particularly, when we think of terrorism, I think of someone who will put the bombs on and blow himself, right? That's the way to guarantee heavens and hallucinations and all these things that are attached to it, right? So what they do is they find people, right? And I was explaining somebody the other day that, we have to look at the family dynamics here too. The Western family dynamics versus Eastern family dynamics. A person who is not so well off, and he is responsible for his family. His mother, sister, brother, a lot of people, right? And in his mind, if he can die for them, right, he will be atoned. This is the best thing he can do. So those people come and offer him money and also a place in paradise. Yep. So it's a win-win on both sides. Your family is taken care of. You're given money. Yep. And then you, after your death, you're straight going to heavens. Your all sins are forgiven in the past. You're martyred. Martyrdom is celebrated to this day in the part of the world where I come from, with the part of the world where Muslim is conservativeness is there. There's a cheer for martyrdom, right? So yes, you do that, and then it's a very simple path. It's a very attractive path. So that's a lot of youngsters, particularly, I would not call youngsters, I would say kids from age 13 to 16 fall into that trap. right? That's how you recruit terrorists. And a lot of it is, of course, I'll blame Islam, and then I'll blame the people who orchestrate Islam in that fashion, because of course definitions vary from place to place. But given that is how you recruit terrorists. And
Sure.
I don't see.
I also think that, in some like, I'm Turkish, right? And I've had conversations with Turkish people who don't know that I'm a Christian. And then the conversation, when it becomes political, will become inherently anti-American and inherently anti-Semitic, right? Like, listen, the world has problems, and I think that when we get into this idea that we're going to blame our problems, right, on, other people instead of taking accountability for our own actions, right? Listen, the Jews don't control the world. If anyone's ever been to Israel, they don't even control Israel, right? Like, it's crazy.
Deep pockets, bro. Deep pockets.
It's not as deep as you think. If you do the research on, like, we talked about lobby groups. If you do the research on lobby groups, AIPAC's not even in the top 10. And you know who is in the top 10? Qatar, right? You know who is in the top 10? Saudi Arabia, right? Like, who is in the top 10, right? It's AIPAC. AIPAC's not even in the top 10.
It is just not AIPAC. AIPAC is related to the government officials, but it's off topic. We will talk about this some other day.
Sure. I'm saying that it's in the radicalization process. You have to find, like, a straw man. You have to find somebody, and then you have to make yourself a steel man, right? Like, you're the one resisting, and you have to find somebody to blame for, whatever the situation is. And whether that blame is legitimate or not, right? Then it crosses over into violence.
And the reason this is true of marriages and politics, right? This is just human nature.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that one thing we haven't talked about, and this is, let's talk about, like, Shaitan. Let's talk about Hasatan. Let's talk about the devil. Let's talk about how he desires to throw people into this grist mill, and just grind up souls and destroy them. I'm going to go to K-pop demon hunters, right? Like, he's just gonna attract people with a song and lead them to and whatever that song would be, right? So you didn't watch K-pop demon hunters, I know, but
no daughters yet.
I have 4 daughters.
One thing I want to hear from you, Jill, which we didn't cover, which you need to cover. One of the sort of chief leads in this case is him being associated with Tablighi Jamaat. What do you know about them? How plausible do you think that link is in this situation?
Yeah, I myself was part of Tablighi Jamaat for a little while, and I found Tablighi Jamaat to be very non-violent. It is the completely opposite course that they have taken from the conservative, traditional religious motives of Islam. It was like jihad, for example, according to them, is going in the path of God and preaching Islamic things to the people, rest of the world, right? You'll find them in Africa. You'll find them, carrying their baggages and walking a long distance. That's what, I don't want to go back to the origin where it's originated, but just to give a little bit of brief history, it's originated in India, 1920, 30, somewhere around those years. And the motive was to bring people to the path of God, start with the Muslims. Right, there are teams that are dedicated to Muslims, and there are teams that are dedicated for external dawah. Right, so the mostly it is just like making yourself better. The reason that Muslims are suffering because you have given up the path of God, and whoever dies in this path will be guaranteed Jannah. So equivalence to that jihad, right? But here is the caveat: that level of dedication. Follow Islam 100%, then you're attached to Hadith, and you're attached to Sunnah, and then you're attached to so many things. And when the package is there, then of course you come across some material that can have an effect on your brain, which will be for example, making this case on basis on Tablighi Jamaat. He was attached with Tablighi Jamaat, and when he realized, I'm making this hypothetical scenario here, okay? Now to just make him an Islamic terrorist here. He was part of Tablighi Jamaat, and he realized that all his life he supported the wrong people, right? And that realization was a guilt in himself. It's like, oh, what I did, how can I redeem myself? Because it was, if you're connected to Islamic materials, you're just reading so many things that gives you, I'm not particularly saying in Quran, but in Hadith, as you know as well, that there is so much disturbing material
Right.
that can be very detrimental to the societies which we live in,
Right. And that could work itself out in a couple ways. So basically, it's like it could be you cannot blame Tablighi Jamaat for this.
Yes,
but it could function kind of like
explain what that is.
It's a sort of Dawah group.
It's a Dawah
group in English, Dawah.
So basically they go spread Islam places, and then they're non-violent, but it's kind of like, if you it could function like a gateway drug basically, but like
sure,
but you can't blame weed for heroin overdoses. But if you're in doing one thing, it is easier to move up to the next thing.
Sure.
But it's not inherent, so you can't blame.
I think the Tablighi Jamaat has done a lot of good than it has done bad, because it took people who were on the wrong course to the right course. It's like my family is involved with the Tablighi Jamaat, and there is no sign of violence or inherent hate towards other religion, but it also depends on your cultural assimilations, I would say. Pashtuns in general tend to have more conservative tendencies when they go, like, I used to know a guy, this is again off topic, but I would like to mention that, he was big on Tablighi Jamaat, right? And my uncle made a small mosque near his hotel, right? And my uncle at that time was little, not so good of a Muslim, right? And he used to call it a Masjid Zarar, and he said, destroy this masjid. This is not you where you. So the idea is their practices become so rigid.
Yep.
Right. So, and that's like, believe in Allah. Allah is the doer of everything, and Muhammad is the last prophet. And you have to follow Islam to its very solid core without the sense of violence. Of course, there is no violence in Tablighi Jamaat, but again, it drives somehow. You can get radicalized if you're not in the right hand, if there is no proper counseling on you, because there are people who are constantly counseling. You're listening to their sermons and they're so on and so forth.
So in an investigation, it's a lead worth pursuing, but it definitely is not an all-encompassing explanation.
Yeah, no.
So then this is really important, and what I want to land with is that as Christians, obviously what we're looking at are very complex problems that require sophisticated solutions, not simplistic ones. If we pursue simplistic solutions, they're likely to fail at best, and at worst create more problems. So we need to know people better. We need to know ideas better. We need to be more dialed into the well-being of our neighbors. Part of the problem with modern America right now is you have these vast jungles of people who are like unknown and unloved and unvetted, and we need all of it. We need better vetting of people. We need to keep better track of what our neighbors actually think and believe, and we need to make sure that people here who are here are loved and supported. And I don't care what you believe about immigration. As a Christian, your duty is to love your neighbor. And yes, you can advocate for stricter immigration laws and immigration reform and all that, but your job is to love the person in front of you, not in a sappy, virtue signaling way, but in an all-encompassing way that is there to speak for the good and well-being of your neighbors. Thank you for listening to Christ and Caliphate. We'll be back next time.